Welcome to Mysteries to Die For and this toe tag. I am TG Wolff and I'm here with Jack, my piano player and producer. This is normally a podcast where we combine storytelling with original music to put you at the heart of a mystery. Today is a bonus episode that we call a toe tag. It's the first chapter from a fresh release in the mystery, crime, or thriller genre. You know, I think I'm going to have to change that because more and more often I don't read the first chapter. I read what I think you need to hear to decide if this mystery is for you. Anyway, today's featured release is The Nowhere Girls by Dana Perry. So, as I said, I'm becoming more and more prone to not reading the first chapter, and that is the case again this time. We are going to read 2 chapters from The Nowhere Girls, the ones that really set up the mystery, because we are about mysteries here at Mystery to Die For. My 12-year-old sister Caitlin was abducted on July 19, 2008, exactly 15 years ago this summer. Her body was found days later in a wooded area of the small town of Huntsdale, Ohio, where I'd grown up. David Monroe was arrested for the murder and had been in prison ever since. Every year, on the anniversary of Caitlin's disappearance, I had gone to the Ohio prison where he was being held and attempted to talk to him. I wanted to find out why. Why this person did something like that to horribly change my life and my family so completely. But Monroe would never speak to me. He just sat there, silently, staring at me and ignoring my questions until the hour-long visit was over. It was almost July 19th again, and I had already planned to fly to Huntsdale on my day off and try once again to confront Monroe in jail. Even though I was pretty convinced at this point that he was never going to reveal anything to me about what really happened to Caitlin that summer day. Except now, on the 15th anniversary of the day he abducted and murdered my sister, he suddenly had indicated he was ready to do just that. And all the memories came rushing back for me again. I had what I thought was a pretty good life back then, during that last summer I spent in Huntsdale. My father, Luke Cassidy, was the Huntsdale police chief, which meant everyone looked up to him, and our family too. I was 18 years old, just graduated from high school, and was getting ready to head for college. The future looked very bright for me, and for my younger sister, Caitlin, too, until the carnival came to town. The carnival was a highly anticipated annual summer event in the town of Huntsdale, where I grew up, especially for me and other young people there. The carnival meant riding the Ferris wheel, the tilt-a-whirl, and other cool stuff. It meant eating great food like chili dogs and cotton candy and winning prizes at the arcades. And, most of all, for me anyway, it meant meeting boys. There was a lot of boys at the carnival, and I was an 18-year-old girl who loved meeting and hanging out with boys. Yes, boys were very important to me back then. Which was why I was so upset when my mother told me I couldn't go to the carnival on the first day it opened. My mother said she had places to go that day and needed me to stay home to be with my 12-year-old sister, Caitlin, until she got back home later that evening. But all my friends were going to the opening of the carnival, and I so desperately wanted to be there with them. And so, without telling my mother what I was doing, I took my sister to the carnival with me and all my friends. It was fine at first. Caitlin seemed to enjoy being there with me and all the older kids. Except she was afraid of the rides. We managed to get her to go on the Ferris wheel with us. That seemed safe enough to her, I guess. But when we got to the tilt-a-whirl, she was terrified of it. The tilt-a-whirl was actually my favorite ride at the carnival. Scary and exciting, but all in a good way. And I tried to convince Caitlin it would be fun, but she adamantly refused. And so, when me and my friends got to the tilt-a-whirl, we left Caitlin standing by the ticket counter to watch us. Even now, all these years later, I still remember what she looked like that day. Wearing tan slacks, a brown and white striped top, and a Cincinnati Reds baseball cap. Her long blonde hair hanging down her back, waving at us for luck. She looked a lot like me. Well, a younger version of myself when I was 12. And I still thought about that sometimes when I remembered that day at the carnival. It was the last time I would ever see Caitlin alive. When we got off the ride a few minutes later, she was gone. There was a frantic search for her that went on for days, until it finally ended, tragically. Caitlin's body, she'd been shot to death, was found by a dog walker in a wooded area called Grant Woods, several miles away. And, in a horrifyingly macabre touch, the killer had placed a wreath of roses on her head in death. No one ever understood about the wreath of roses. Since my father was the police chief in Huntsdale at the time, this meant he had to investigate the murder of his own daughter. It was a terrible ordeal for him. I remember that so well. But he did his job as professionally as he could. That was my father. He was always the consummate professional police chief. The search for the person who did it focused at first on the people working the carnival. Many of them were temporary workers and drifters and had some criminal records. So it seemed likely one of them had killed my sister. But despite intense interrogation of everyone and anyone associated with the carnival, none of them were ever linked to her death or even named as a potential suspect. Instead, the murderer turned out to be a person from the area, David Monroe. He worked as a postal clerk in a town near to Huntsdale. People there said Monroe was known as a loner, a bit strange, but no one ever suspected he was capable of murder until Caitlin's death. The key to catching Monroe turned out to be a parking ticket. Later, his DNA or fingerprints were found at the crime scene. Even more damning evidence came when strands of Caitlin's hair and pieces of her clothing were found inside Monroe's home, which he apparently kept as a sick souvenir of her murder. Monroe was quickly convicted and is now serving a life sentence at a high-security prison called Dagmore outside of Columbus, about 75 miles away from Huntsdale. He later admitted to Caitlin's murder in a deal with the prosecution to avoid the death sentence. But despite that admission, Monroe had never talked about why he had killed her or divulged any more details about the murder. For me, my entire world collapsed that very day Caitlin went missing. It was a nightmare that has haunted me ever since, especially after my father suddenly died that summer too. It was just a few weeks after my sister Caitlin's murder that my father suffered a fatal heart attack. Many people, including me I guess, believe the heart attack came because of the stress of losing a daughter in such a horrifying way. My mother, without a husband and having lost a daughter, didn't turn to me, her only surviving family member, for support. Instead, she blamed me for everything, saying it was all because I had taken Caitlin to the carnival that day. She constantly laid the guilt of Caitlin's murder and my father's subsequent death on me. What made it even worse was that I already struggled to deal with my own guilt over what I did. I so badly wanted my mother's love and emotional support to get me through those terrible times. But instead, she just made everything worse, and still does even after all this time. My relationship with my mother had always been complicated. I loved my father, and he loved me back, unconditionally. On the other hand, my mother and me, well, we had some problems, especially as I got older and began going through the teenage drama that a girl goes through. My mother wasn't much help to me there, so our relationship was never great, even before Caitlin died. But after Caitlin was gone, and my mother was forced to deal with that reality, well, that's when things truly fell apart between us. We haven't talked in a long time. I knew back then that I had to get away as quickly as possible. In a small town like Huntsdale, everyone knew everyone else's business. Everyone knew me as the girl who took her sister to the carnival where she got abducted and killed. I desperately wanted to go someplace where people didn't look at me like that and judge me, which is what I did, going away to college first and then joining the FBI in Washington and eventually specializing with the Bureau in rescuing missing children. I couldn't save my own sister. It was too late for that. But I could save other children like her from the same fate. Even now, after all this time, I hardly ever go back. Whenever I do, I feel trapped and uncomfortable and out of place. I never stay for very long. I always rush back to Washington as quickly as I can to escape the nightmares from my past that still haunt me back when I'm in my hometown. Except I still could never put the memories of my sister behind me. That's why every year, on the anniversary of her abduction from the carnival, I returned to Ohio and attempted to talk to David Monroe in prison there, looking for some answers from this man, looking for some kind of closure for Caitlin. That has never happened. Every year, when I went there to visit him, Monroe just sat there silently and refused to reveal anything, until now. Now Monroe suddenly wanted to talk to me about Caitlin's murder, and I had to find out why. David Monroe's lawyer, the one I talked to on the phone, was a woman named Doreen Trask. She was waiting for me in the visitors area when I entered the prison. Doreen Trask didn't look much like a lawyer. She looked more like a crazy bag lady you'd expect to see on the street. A middle-aged woman with dingy blonde hair, a bit chunky and dressed in baggy jeans and a t-shirt. Her greeting to me was a quick one, more perfunctory, barely a handshake. I wondered if she was going to make some requests or even demands before she allowed me to talk to him. But instead, she simply kept walking with me to the area where David Monroe would be brought to meet me. "I've been here to see him before, you know," I said, mostly to make some sort of conversation. "He's never talked to me." "He'll talk to you now," she assured. "Will I get an entire hour?" I asked. "It won't take that long. That's what he told me. But he said whatever he had to say to you now would be well worth your time. That he can give you the answers, or at least some of the answers, that you've been looking for." I nodded and we kept walking. This wasn't exactly what I expected. "How long have you been with Monroe?" I asked. "I've been representing him as an attorney for the past few months," she said, "but I've been with David for longer than that." "You knew him before you became his lawyer?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "You were a friend?" "I'm his wife," she said. "His wife," I repeated. David Monroe had never been married in the time of his trial and conviction. "We got married while he was in prison," she explained. "Well, not officially married, but we act together as a man and wife. David loves me, and I love him. I'm pregnant with his baby." I looked down at the loose-fitting top she was wearing. I realized now it hid the baby she was carrying in her stomach, David Monroe's baby. "They allow conjugal visits with the inmates?" I asked. "Not really," she said. "Then how?" "There's an advantage to being his attorney," she smiled. "It allows us to have some private time together, to talk about legal stuff, but also to do other things. That's how we consummated our marriage." Damn, David Monroe sure was full of surprises. So what surprise did he have in store for me? David Monroe didn't look like the way I remembered him from the last time I was here, just a year ago, or the times before that. He'd lost weight, his face was gone, and the prison uniform hung loosely from his body. I wondered if he was sick, some sort of bad terminal illness. That would be nice on one hand, but it also meant I'd have to get his secrets from him quickly before he died. We walked into the room where we were meeting and sat down in a chair at a table across from me. There was a prison guard accompanying him, but I told the guard to wait outside and close the door. I wanted this to just be about David Monroe and me. The guard was concerned if Monroe might try something with me alone in the room. I had checked my gun at the prison entrance before I came in, according to regulations, but I wasn't worried about Monroe hurting me in any way. That wasn't why he asked me to come here. For some reason, he decided to talk with me, at last. "Thank you for coming to see me," Monroe said now. "I've come to see you before," I said, "and you never thanked me. You wouldn't even speak to me." "Okay," he said, "then thank you for coming to see me this time." I didn't want to waste any more time on preliminaries. I took out a picture of my sister Caitlin and placed it down on the table between us. It had been taken at her 12th birthday party, a few weeks before her abduction and death. She was smiling at the camera, dressed in a pretty party dress, and eating a big piece of chocolate birthday cake. She was 12 years old, I said to Monroe, trying my best to somehow keep my emotions under control, despite the fact that I was finally talking to the man responsible for murdering my sister. She had her whole life in front of her. And you took that away from her. You took that away from all of us. Why? That's what I have to know. Why did you do something like this? And why to her? Monroe looked down at the picture of my sister. He didn't react at first, just stared at it. Well, I said, tell me about what happened to my sister. He looked back at me now. You never should have left your sister alone at the carnival while you went on that ride with your friends. I sat there, stunned. The prison guard might have been worried beforehand that David Monroe might do something to hurt me physically. But if Monroe had hit me, he couldn't have hurt me more than he did with just those words. The same words I said to myself over and over again so many times over the years. I wondered if he was trying to bait me, to get me upset and rattled and angry for some reason. Maybe that's the only reason he asked to see me on the anniversary of Caitlin's death, to play these kind of mind games with me. But just as soon as he said it, he shook his head and smiled at me. A crazy smile, so crazy that it was almost worse than his original comment. Nah, she would have died anyway, Cassidy. She was the target all the way. If it didn't happen at the carnival, it would have happened later. You shouldn't keep feeling guilty about that. She was going to die sooner or later, no matter what you did or didn't do. But why did you pick to kill her? I asked. Like I said, she was the target. But what does that mean? You'll need to find that on your own, Cassidy. Damn it! This meeting was the closest I'd ever come to thinking I might get some answers about him and about Caitlin. Instead, it was just getting me more frustrated. But I knew, from interviewing other prisoners who'd committed heinous crimes, that it was important for me not to lose my cool and stay professional, even with someone as evil as David Monroe. Why did you ask me to meet after all this time? Your lawyer said you had something you wanted to tell me. I do, he said. Okay, tell me then. I have cancer, he said. Stage 4 cancer of the colon. It's untreatable, so I don't have a long time to live. Maybe 3 months, the doctors say. 6 at most. I didn't say anything. The appropriate response is something like, I'm sorry to hear that. Not for you it isn't, I said. I'm dying, Agent Cassidy. I only hope it's an excruciating, painful death, I said. No quality mercy at all from you here? You killed my sister, I said. You didn't feel sorry for her. Karma's a bitch. Now it's your turn. And when you're dead, I'll celebrate. For myself and for my dead sister, too. But I still want to hear from you what happened and why. Why did you kill an innocent 12-year-old girl, Monroe? Why did you kill my sister? Why did you abduct her from that carnival? Why did you leave a wreath of roses on her? Why? I'm trying to put things in order before I leave this planet, he said. I made a lot of mistakes when I was young. I did some bad stuff. I know that now. I wasn't willing to confront that about myself for a long time, so I never talked with you all those other times. But I knew one day I would need to deal with everything I've done in my life and tried to make some of it right again. That's why I'm with Doreen, he continued. She loves me, Cassidy. Crazy, huh? Now she's carrying our child. A part of me will live on after I'm gone. Hopefully that child will be a better person than me. And maybe my child can bring some good into the world to balance out all the evil things I did. That's why I'm talking to you here today about this. Monroe looked down again at the picture of Caitlin in front of us, the little 12-year-old girl at the birthday party with so much to live for, the little girl who would die for no discernible reason a few weeks later. I didn't kill your sister, Monroe said softly. What? That's what I need to tell you. I didn't kill your sister. I wanted you to know that. What sort of games are you trying to pull, Monroe? You were convicted for her murder. You gave up all rights for an appeal. Of course you killed her. And you just told me how she was your goddamn target all the time. I was there that day, he said. I was tracking her. I was there when she was abducted. But I didn't kill her. There are more people involved than just me. Find them, and you'll get all the answers about your sister. More people involved, I asked. Who? Where do I go to look for these people? Nowhere, Monroe laughed. They're nowhere. What does that mean? That's all I got to say for now, he said. Maybe later. Monroe stood up and started to leave. He knocked on the door and called for the guard. Wait a minute, I said. I have more questions for you. A lot more questions. He was on his way out the door now, headed back to his cell. If you really didn't kill my sister, tell me who did, I shouted at him. Monroe turned around and looked at me. Maybe you should have asked your father that question back then. My father? What does my father have to do with this? He could tell you a lot about your sister's death. Ask him. My father is dead. Well, I guess you can't ask him. David Monroe laughed again now, a scary, crazy laugh. And then he was gone. All right, so that is the setup of the mystery of The Nowhere Girls by Dana Perry. So here is my review. The Nowhere Girls is a cold case crime thriller. FBI agent Nikki Cassidy has returned home to visit David Monroe in prison. On this 15th anniversary, her sister killer has an agenda of his own, and Nikki is the key. Bottom line, The Nowhere Girls is for you if you like serial killer crime thrillers where the past is a key to the present. All right. So two strengths of the story lie in the complexity of the crime and the pacing of its reveal. As indicated in the back cover synopsis, so it's not a spoiler, the crime here is the kidnapping and murder of not one young girl, but several. It begins with the cold case investigation of Caitlin's murder, that's Nikki's sister, 15 years ago, and is ramped up with the disappearance of another 13-year-old girl, Natalie, on the anniversary of Caitlin's disappearance. While revisiting the site of where her sister's body was discovered, Nikki and her team find yet another body, this one from a girl who disappeared from another state. That element of cross-state boundaries enables Nikki and the FBI to officially step into the case, and for her team to come in. The evolution of the mystery is deliberately paced and satisfying, with nearly every chapter counting as part of the mystery. This is the first in the Nikki Cassidy series, with the next two already released. I've not read the others in this series. For a first story, Nikki is well developed. Readers can see from early on how her greatest strength is also her greatest weakness. Nikki is one of those characters who has an abundance of confidence in her own judgment and abilities. This gives her the steadfastness to stick to a case where others would have turned away, but also causes her to make some poor and selfish decisions where other people pay the consequences. She's a really nicely developed, complex character. I think a lot of people will like her, some will be frustrated with her, and that just proves how well written she is. The supporting cast in the story are largely the characters associated with Caitlin's murder, including the convicted killer, who you just met, David Monroe, his wife/lawyer, the Emmy, and the prosecutor at the time. Each of these characters are distinctly drawn, making it easy for me to both remember them and to differentiate them. I'm one of those people who has a very hard time keeping characters separate. The logic of the mystery holds up reasonably well when looked from back to front. My one problem with the logic was there's no real evidence laid out in the story that led to the ultimate big bad. Instead, the big bad self-revealed in the culmination. So while this leads to a wrap-up that's really satisfying for the reader, ultimately, Nikki didn't really solve the mystery herself. She was more in the right place, the right time kind of thing. And when we look at how the main character, Nikki, drove the story, here again there's mixed results. Nikki is totally focused on the cold case of her sister's murder, while there's an active hunt going on for missing 13-year-old Natalie. Understanding that Nikki has convinced herself that there's a connection between the two, and there is no sense of urgency on Nikki's part to find Natalie. After the first interview with Natalie's parents, Nikki is focused on what happened 15 years ago. So Nikki absolutely drives the cold case investigation, yes, but not the missing person in imminent danger storyline. I think readers will enjoy this crime thriller best if they go into it with the expectation of a cold case crime thriller rather than a missing persons thriller. The discovery that there is a serial killer and answers to Caitlin's murder are the central story. The search for Natalie is not. The dynamic storytelling, dramatic pacing, and satisfying ending make The Nowhere Girls great entertainment for lovers of crime thrillers. The Nowhere Girls was released from Bookature. I don't know I've never seen that that publisher before. Bookoouture, Bookature, and is promoted by Partners in Crime Tours, and is available from Amazon and other book retailers. Links are in the show notes. Let me tell you a little bit about Dana Perry. Dana Perry is a New York City author who writes mystery thrillers under the pen names of Dana Perry and R.G. Belsky. He is an award-winning author of crime fiction and a journalist in New York City. As Perry, he writes crime thrillers, including the Nikki Cassidy series. As Belsky, he has published 20 novels, all set in New York City media, in the New York City media world, where he has a long career as a top editor at the New York Post, New York Daily News, Star Magazine, and NBC News. He is a contributing writer for the Big Thrill magazine and Book Trip. Partners in Crime represents a network of 300-plus bloggers offering tailor-made virtual book tours and marketing options for crime, mystery, and thriller writers from around the world. Founded in 2011, PICT offers virtual book tour services for well-established and best-selling authors, as well as for those just starting out their careers. PICT prides itself on its tailored packages for authors with a personal touch from the tour coordinators. For more information, check out their website, partnersincrimetours.com. Link is in the show notes. Join us next week for the next episode in Season 7, Games People Play. Episode 11 features that classic playground game Tetherball in Tethered to Drama by Karina Bartaw. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jack to take us out.